Somebody's gave me 20 years ago a little printout that said, the 11th commandment, thou shalt make backups. Back up
Yeah.
your data, take responsibility for your data.
Welcome to the Tech Savvy Recruiter, the podcast for recruitment and staffing agency owners keen to explore the tech innovations reshaping our industry. I'm Andrew Roger from RecMate.
And I'm Belinda Kerr from Recruitment Garage, and together we're your hosts bringing you a stellar lineup of tech experts ready to help you understand and, more importantly, benefit from the increasing array of tech available to you today.
Hello and welcome to the Tech Savvy Recruiter, everybody. Today, Belinda and I have a very special guest, Andrew Naar from Sapphire Computing Solutions. He's the CEO of a leading IT support service provider specializing in cybersecurity, help desk support, IT configuration, and VoIP setup for lots of sectors, but does specialize in the recruitment sector. So they've got lots of recruitment customers, so they know our world well. We'll be diving into some of the biggest tech trends impacting recruiters in 2025 and how forward-thinking agencies like you guys listening to the show can stay one step ahead. Andrew, great to have you here. Before we jump into the session, do you mind introducing yourself a little bit more and what your business does?
So, like you said, we are Sapphire Computing Solutions. We're an IT management and support company. We've been around for about 20 years. I'm based out of Sydney, but our clientele are global. And we have clients here with offices overseas. We have clients from overseas with offices here. And we basically manage and provide support for all of their IT, data protection, cybersecurity, and anything to do with the technology in their business.
Yeah, fantastic. It's certainly an evolving world. I remember my first recruitment job, I had a green box in front of me, which had, I think, 35 lines on that green box. It was a DOS-based system. I think the recruitment database was called BOSS from memory. And we had a compactus, which for those that don't know what a compactus is a big filing cabinet, basically, where all the hard copy printed entries, paper resumes were stored. And there was a reference number in that file, and you had to hop off your chair, walk down to the compactus and open it up, and hopefully you don't squish a colleague that was in an adjacent column there, and pull out that resume to have a squiz at that person's resume. So a lot has changed in the 25 years that I've been involved with industry, and particularly around how we're operating. And I think, one of the key things is that there is so much around with hybrid or split, I guess, office location, working from home or working from anywhere, really, in our industry itself. And so really interested to hear about what your thoughts are around staffing agencies operating in that, perhaps fully remote sometimes teams, and some of those critical IT infrastructure items that they may not be thinking about, but real, that needs to be considered for operations to run smoothly.
Well, it is an interesting thing. And I think, like you've really alluded to there, that we've had that move from a paper-based environment to a paperless environment where everything is done digitally, everything is done online. All of the information is transferred backwards and forwards between the recruiters and the applicants. And really, there's very little paperwork as such that's involved anymore. And I think with, not true just to the recruitment industry, but across industry in general, most businesses and business owners really struggle, I think, with the idea of where technology is today. I think most businesses and business owners have kind of been through that process, like you said, of going from, those giant compactors where you'd wind the wheel to move them along and not squash the person in the other column. But they're used to running their businesses like that. And technology itself, although it provides so many efficiencies within the business, it brings with it a huge number of additional considerations that are just really outside of the business owner's mind. And you raised some of them there. You've got a remote workforce. People used to come into the office, they'd sit down, they'd work together. You would see what's going on, hear what's going on, know what's going on. Now they're working from anywhere, almost any device, doing whatever they want. And I think in a sense, you kind of hope that they're being efficient and productive, but how do you manage and track that? And like I said, the technology itself lends itself to being more efficient, the systems that we use, the solutions that we use, and that's evolving almost on a weekly basis. But again, those considerations need to be taken by the business owner.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, speaking of that evolution around complete paper-based office, where, big machines printing off resumes, so I could view those, critique them, then push them into the compactors after I was done with them. Through to, I was just trying to think the last time I hit print on anything. It must be probably 3 years plus. I've got a task that's taking me probably 6 weeks that I should have done it for. I've got an inquiry with the local council to find some information about an adjacent property, but they want a certified copy of my driver's license. So I have to go somewhere, print a copy of that, then get it certified, and then upload it to the council website to get that done. And that, I don't know printer. I have no need for one now. And likewise, the evolution of the recruitment landscape has been dramatic over the last 10 to 15 years, from that side-by-side workplace where there was often an IT professional on the floor for a company of some sort of scale, who maybe 20 seats or 30 seats plus, so you would have usually been an IT support person. Evolution of that compactors turned into a on-premise server and the good old server rooms where the telephony was stored, plus the servers and backup drives and all that kind of fun stuff of yesteryear, through to databases where it's in the cloud, and sometimes there are restrictions on having that cloud based in Australia or within your region, but can be anywhere. And it's a very, very different world. And having, I guess, set up to make me efficient as a worker in recruitment or an adjacent industry is getting sometimes a bit tricky. I was speaking with a customer the other week, and I said, well, what's your IT infrastructure? And we went through that, and he said, okay, well, who looks after that for you? And they were running on Macs. And he said, well, if we've got a problem, we get by booking at the Genius Bar at the local Apple store. So, but that can be a couple of days to get booked in there, and then it's that person's time and all that kind of stuff.
It's not only that, it's also that you've got, like you said, when you had the office and you had possibly an IT person working in the office and you had your server or a couple of servers in the corner and you had your phone system, right? You had your PCs on the desk and everybody was working there. That was all you needed. You would have had email. Email would have been running on the server there, and you had Outlook on your machine and it connected to your Exchange on the server, and off you went. Problems, or not the problems, but the challenges that we face today is that there are so many more things that we need to use and think about when we're running a business. Having that data on your machines, having that data stored in databases in the cloud, being able to access that from anywhere, having your email systems now running from the cloud, but being accessed again from anywhere and everywhere. Those things are fantastic. However, that means that your data is now vulnerable in so many more ways. That client that you were talking about there, that they're using the Macs, and if there's a problem, they take the Mac into the Mac store. But what are they doing about everything else that they're using? How are they protecting their data? How are they protecting their email? How are they protecting their Macs and their desktop? How are they backing up that information? Which systems are they using, and do those systems integrate? The telephony that you were talking about before, that was great. It was quite a simple system. You had a phone on the desk, you picked it up, you made a phone call. And somebody called in, it either rang a group or it rang at your desk and you picked it up and answered it. Now you want that phone system to integrate with the database system that you're using, the recruitment system that you're using, so that if somebody calls in, it pops their card up in front of you, or if you're looking at somebody's card and you want to call, you press a button that automatically goes to the phone and calls out, it records the call. All of those things you want to look at in terms of integrating. So having that one person in the office often now isn't enough, because there are too many systems to bring together and manage and protect.
Yeah, it's a rapidly evolving puzzle for a business, I think, to have all those pieces in alignment, and sometimes it might get a little bit too hard. And I think sometimes people make some assumptions, and only a small fraction of clients that I initially liaise with have a backup of their core database running as well. Okay, yeah. So what happens? That's all done by insert product name. And I said, well,
and that's not necessarily true. Yeah. If you take the big players, let's say, just if you take Microsoft and Google, you might be having them for your data storage, your files, your folders, your email. They don't back any of that stuff up. They'll possibly provide a recycle bin that might hold something for 30 days. They will provide what they call high availability. So if a data center goes down, then, your data is still going to be available. But if somebody goes and deletes stuff, it's gone.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big gap that most people forget to think about.
Yeah.
So Andrew, I just want to clarify. So when you say they don't back it up, you mean, so if one of your staff go in and delete it, but not Google, like it's there in Google forever as long as somebody doesn't touch it at your end?
That's right. So that data piece will be there if nobody changes it. But if somebody changes it...
in your organisation.
That's right.
What if you get hacked?
Yes, somebody either internal or external. There's no rollback facility for most platforms, so I can't go back 30 days or 12 days, or because sometimes you don't find that this stuff has happened for weeks or maybe sometimes months, and you can't do the time machine Apple used to have. I can't remember what the brand was called, and where it sort of goes back in time. You can say, I want to take that snapshot of data from the 26th of January because we know it was all clean on the 26th of January, and then we'll rebuild the database from that date forward.
So I would hazard a guess that people who are I'm using Google Drive, I would have hazarded a guess that people think that that's safe? Like, okay, I'm using Google Drive. Andrew, you're smiling. Is that what people had sort of, because until I just heard you say that, I have to put hands in the air. I thought that was the case, but clearly
that's the assumption that most people make, is that my data is in the cloud, therefore it is safe and protected. If somebody hacks into your Google account, they have access to all of it and they can get it. Do you have protections around that? And is that being monitored? If somebody got into your PC and through your PC got into your Google Drive and deleted the data or did something on it, would that be recoverable? Like I said, Google, Microsoft, those big players, they don't back the data up, but they make it available to you. Similarly, if you somehow manage to get your data encrypted through ransomware, all of a sudden all your files are encrypted in Google Drive or somewhere. There's no recovery from that.
Wow, I think I've just been hit over the head with a hammer because
Sorry.
No, it's a good hammer.
It's a
good hammer.
Good wake up hammer. A wake up hammer.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to have a thing called a NAS drive here, but it doesn't work anymore. All that's gone. So that was the sort of, I guess, the hard drive backup. Now when it died, all the data died with it. So I'm like, all right. And then I went, oh, okay, well, at least it's along Google. But now hearing this here, and I'm sure there's plenty more people like me listening to this, maybe not quite the case.
Any tips for the listeners that are just panicking right now so they can be proactive?
Asking for a friend, Andrew.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, if somebody had this system and they weren't backing up, what would you suggest?
Somebody's gave me 20 years ago a little printout that said, the 11th commandment, thou shalt make backups. Back up your data, take responsibility for your data. Make sure that you know where that backup is. Don't rely on the hosts for it. Again, and that goes across everything, Xero, MyOb, QuickBooks, all of those sorts of things. Again, they'll make that data available to you, but do they have a backup? You need to find that out for yourselves and be comfortable with the level of recovery that they might provide for you. And if they don't, then work out or, talk to someone about putting a backup in place so that your data can be recovered.
Wow. Yeah. Amazing.
Homework item number 1 for some listeners, I reckon.
Some
find out where is your database being backed up to, if it is, and if not,
it's even, like I said, it's any of the big players that your databases might be in. People might be using Salesforce, they might be using HubSpot, they might be using anything like that. Again, you need to talk to those vendors and find out, do you back up the data? How far does those backups go? What happens if?
Yeah, the first one you said is like Microsoft. They have it available, but they're not going to provide you a copy from the January this year. So
yeah.
Okay. Yep. All right. I think
which is in parallel with most online databases. So big homework task, I think, for
it's like
a
your
lot of
health.
listeners.
You take advantage of all this stuff until you just don't worry about it until it all goes kaput. Then you worry about it.
And that was my point before. When you start talking to businesses and business owners, there are all of these considerations that you have to have that are just not front of mind, because it's not, the business is running, the business is doing what it needs to do. But there's all of these other things that you don't know about that can impact on the business quite dramatically. And that's where, an IT provider, IT support, or IT management comes in and says to you, okay, these are all the things that you need to be thinking about, right? What do we do about them, and how do we protect your business and your data and your reputation?
Yeah.
Wow.
Very interesting.
Amazing. Andrew, just sort of changing direction a little bit. Recruiters traditionally rely heavily on phone and video calls to connect with clients and candidates. So when it comes to VoIP, what new developments and communication tools should we be aware of and thinking about?
Well, from the VoIP perspective, I think one of the main things is, really integration and functionality. How much can that VoIP system do for you? Can you control the call flows? If a call comes in, what happens to that call? Where does it go? Where does it end up? Do you want to make announcements on that call beforehand? Do you want to educate people about your services? Do you want to direct them to a particular team? Do you want to get it going to an individual person? All of those sorts of things from a functionality point of view. From a recruitment point of view as well, do you need to be recording those calls? And where are those recordings stored so that you can go back and listen to them again? Do you have decent reporting on those systems so you can see, again, from a productivity point of view, have my recruiters been making calls? Have they been calling people? What did they do yesterday? Did they make 4 calls in the day? That's not what I want. How many calls are coming into the system so you can see what's happening? Are calls being lost when they come in and not being answered? Because again, you don't want that happening either. Then you take that phone system and you start saying, well, I've got other systems that I'm using. is that phone system going to integrate with the other systems that I have? Can it somehow connect to that system so that when a call comes into me, if I have that applicant or that candidate already in my database, it will automatically bring their record up for the recruiter, and they can know who that person is straight away as that comes in. Can it record or keep track of the call that was made and connect it to that candidate's file? If you're looking up a candidate when you call them, do you have the ability to just click on a link from there that's going to make that call for you straight away? And I think, we're moving more and more away from having desk phones. Everybody's now really, especially in this industry where so many people are working remotely or have the ability to work remotely, it's all on the computer. So you've got a soft phone on the computer, and that needs, does that tie in? Does the phone system allow you to have those soft phones either sitting on your mobile or on your desktop? Those things are pretty key to the phone systems today. One other thing I was going to say as well, does the phone system allow you to have the ability to send text messages, virtual mobile numbers, send and receive text messages that might connect back to a record somewhere? Not all of them do, but again, those are things to think about.
It's interesting. I think one flag for people listening or viewing this also is to think about how your team is using call recording. Are they always saying this call is being recorded for whatever purpose? Because in this region, Australia, last time I read, it was an obligation for both parties to understand the call was being recorded. In other regions, it's a single party needs to understand, i.e. the caller, which I find intriguing sometimes hearing that. And so one party can have that understanding that this call is being recorded, but in Australia, at least, it's both parties. So have a process there. It might be something as the call gets answered, there's some auto text or auto narration saying this call's been recorded for training and whatever purposes, compliance purposes, but have the option to opt out is the tip, because I think a lot of people just hit that record and forget to, I think politely forget rather than surreptitiously forget to let the caller know that it is being recorded. So I think it is an amazing asset to have that recording, particularly with the AI functionality that a lot of these call platforms have, to start elevating what we can do as recruiters to put information into certain parts of the system, or to have that call beautifully curated as a BD call or a interview call for if you're having a meeting with the candidates, and then putting in all the information in the right slots so that we can do more human stuff as recruiters as opposed to being data entry professionals, which is not my skill as a recruiter. And I think I've met a couple of unicorns that love the data entry as well as the sales, but they're far and few between, that's for sure.
3 in Australia, aren't they?
Yeah, I think there probably is about 3. As we were chatting around, probably more of the first little topic we were talking around, where backups came in, I was thinking in the back of my mind of an adjacent topic around something which most people don't want to think about, probably don't think about in their usual day-to-day operations as running a recruitment business, but cyber attacks are becoming more common in the world. There's lots of stats that Google, I know, markets to me when I'm watching YouTube late at night around how many cyber attacks they've saved today. These things happen behind the scenes for a lot of us that we will never know that didn't occur, but it is becoming much more realistic that it could happen to one of us in our recruitment world, data breaches, cyber attacks. And Andrew, what are you seeing as, I guess maybe the first question I've got is, what do you think is the weakest link in IT security, and what are other weak links, and how can recruiters protect their assets in 2025?
Well, like you said, certainly times have changed. Cyber threats are way up. And I think, often we come down to the weakest link being the people. Social engineering, laziness, clicking on a link because it kind of looks okay, not thinking about it. That's the way that most threats and attacks get through. There are so many examples, and one from a few years ago was what they call in the UK, the UK health system. The NHS, thank you. I had NIS in my mind and I knew that was wrong. The NHS, the entire NHS got brought down because one employee clicked on a link in an email. So what do we do about that? Yeah, very much. Again, when we look at a business and we look at the way businesses run today, what I'll refer to as the threat vectors, there are so many different threat vectors that need to be protected. So we spoke about data and backup, right? How do we protect our data? How do we back it up? How do we make sure that we can recover what we need to when we need to, if something was to happen? Because you can never protect 100% against everything. It's not possible. If you think about, the big banks, the big financial institutions, the big insurance companies, government, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars every year just on their security to protect what they have. Small business can't do that. General business can't do that. But there are things that we can do to reduce those risks. So we talk about backup. We talk about the endpoint device, the laptops, the desktops that people are using, and how do we protect those by having the right endpoint protection, or what used to be called antivirus, that's on there, that's monitoring the device to make sure that there's nothing untoward's going on the device. But how do we help the people that are using those devices? When they're surfing the net, when they click on a link, how do we protect those links? Stop them going to, firstly, sites that might be inappropriate for the business, because we don't want them going to those sites that are just, not necessary for their day-to-day work. There could be things around terrorism or adult content or various other things that we could block. But at the same time, how do we stop them from clicking on links that take them to known malware, known threat actors, and blocking those connections from happening in the first place? How do we lock down those machines so that they can't just willy-nilly install applications on there? Because often they might click on a link that installs something that could encrypt the machine or create ransomware on the machine. How do we block that from happening? And how do we make sure that they're only using the applications that we deem to be suitable? We look at email as an example, and we say, all right, well, how do we protect against email? The threats that come in through email are attachments that might have viruses or malware on them. We get phishing emails that come through, and I'll give you an example in a moment. We get impersonation emails where you get an email from the CEO of the business saying, oh, sorry, John, I just, I forgot to do this yesterday, going to the accounts person. Could you just make sure that this payment goes through? But it didn't come from John. It just said John, the CEO, at the top, but it actually came from an external recipient. How do we put something in the email to indicate that it came from external, or block it coming through in the first place because it's an impersonation, or block emails coming from known bad domains into the organization? We had an incident recently where we blocked an email coming through to a client, and they called us up in a huff saying, can't believe this email system that you're using. You blocked this email coming through from so-and-so. We've been dealing with them for 15 years. And we've always had the emails come through. This is rubbish. So we had a look at it. And what had happened is that so-and-so got hacked and their email was compromised, and emails got sent out from their account that were phishing, that were trying to capture credentials from the people that the email were going to. And our client was a recipient of one of those emails, which is why it got blocked. Once we explained
I hope they apologized.
They did. But, they were grateful that it's actually working and doing what it's supposed to do. But that's another vector that, that needs to be protected.
I had an interesting one the other day, Andrew, where one of the clients in Australia, normally when people pay for our program, they normally do through an online subscription site, but they were in Australia, so they were transferring directly. And so I sent the invoice out, and they contacted me and said, oh, can you actually send your banking details? And I thought, oh, they're on the invoice. And then I remembered that there's actually been cases where products like Xero and MYOB, these other, that sent them out and then they've been intercepted on the way, changed the banking details,
Yes.
and then the person's put the money in the wrong account. And I thought, gosh, and I thought, well, that was smart of him to ask, because it's the first time I've been asked, and I was like, why did he ask me? I was wondering, and then it clicked. So it can happen in such an innocuous way.
Correct. And that's one of the other things. It's like, you're using an email system, whether it be Google or Microsoft 365, those are the two predominant ones. But, are you looking for logins from, unapproved locations? Is somebody logging into someone's account from Russia, for example? Has there been a login in Sydney and then an hour later the same login from that person in China? Well, that's called impossible travel. They can't get there that quickly, right? So are you looking for those sorts of things as well, and monitoring systems to look for those anomalies? Again, these are all like I said, there's all these considerations that need to be considered. Can't think of another word for it.
Managed,
when you look at the technology in your business to protect it.
To me, it feels overwhelming. And I know you can't, when something's overwhelming, you can't just stick your head in the sand and do nothing. And for me, and I think you sort of touched on it too, Andrew, it was like, these are the things, you can't do everything. What can you do? Do these things to at least go from 100% open the gates to bringing it down to a 20% open the gate to being in trouble.
Yeah,
when you look at that, and it's like you're saying, it's kind of like you want to reduce the risk as much as you can, right?
Yeah.
And when you look at all of these different things, like you said, sometimes can be very overwhelming to try and implement it all in one go, in which case work with an organization that can help you to do that so you can focus on your business. Or you kind of come with the dilemma of, well, I've locked the front door and I've locked the two windows at the front, but the whole of the back of the office is open, right? So they can still get in through there. So which bits do I leave off?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people who are in this industry are the small entrepreneur who gets a little bit bigger, and for many years they might have a front end system that manages their client data, but they've not even thought about this stuff. And I think there will be maybe a few people listening to this today, be like having a car with no insurance, I guess, is probably a good analogy there. You're just driving, hoping something doesn't happen, and you might be the best driver in the world, but there's other people on the road. So, and I think your story of that other person on the road was that client of yours whose email got blocked because of a third party being hacked, not them
Correct.
being hacked. It's somebody that you've done business with or has your details through other ways. So.
But on that analogy, it's
homework
also
item number 2.
I was going to analogy. It's also like a car that never gets serviced. If you're not servicing it, it's going to run fine because it's just runs
working fine
until
today.
it stops, and then you're stuck.
Until it doesn't, yeah. So, Andrew, we talk a lot about on this podcast. We talk a lot about sort of direct recruitment activity, like sourcing candidates, etc. How that's changing the game, but it's also, as we've touched on here, revealizing the IT support side of things too. So can you just shed a little bit more light on how automation and AI-driven tools are really enhancing this whole tech side of rec operations?
Yeah, well, I mean, like you said, there's two sides of it, and I think AI for is a wonderful tool, but a double-edged sword. It can be very productive and helpful, but it can be extremely dangerous at the same time. And then there's quite a few things there to go through. So from the support and technology and management side of things, AI gets involved in a lot of the monitoring side of things. When we talk about that email protection, for example, the email protection systems we use behavioral monitoring, machine learning, and artificial intelligence to analyze every email that comes through. Where did that email come from? Has the recipient ever received an email from this person before? Did the domain that email come from suddenly, has it only been generated in the last week? Therefore, it's new. Are there any other things going on in the world that we've seen around that particular domain or sender that could be suspicious? Are the right email framework or protection frameworks in place for that domain so that I can verify that the email that I'm receiving is actually coming from where it's supposed to come from? So the AI on that side of things is analyzing all of that information in order to determine whether or not the email that you receive is safe, right? And that comes in. When we look at the endpoint protection on the desktops, same sort of thing. Looking at, is the machine performing the way that it's supposed to be performing? Is it doing the things that it's always used to be doing? Or all of a sudden, is it suddenly doing something that it shouldn't be doing? And we'll use ransomware again as an example, suddenly reaching out to all the other machines on the network and has never done that before, right? And do we stop that? The applications that are running on that machine, are they safe? Have they been used on this machine before? Again, and then bringing in telemetry from the millions and millions and millions of other users that are out there to determine what is safe, how is it safe, what is normal behavior, and then bringing that together in order to make sure that what you're doing is safe. And then that goes that goes through all the different systems that you're using and monitoring and looking at. There is so much data there. We need to be using these, AI and other tools in order to review that data to determine what is good, what is bad, what is safe, what is malicious. When you look at the business side of things and taking advantage of AI, there are some fantastic tools that can be used around, obviously in the recruitment space, when you're looking at things like reviewing applications that are coming in to see how well a candidate might fit for a particular role. I was reading up some stuff, and as an example, Unilever reportedly saved 100,000 hours annually with AI, and in doing that was able to increase diversity hires by 16%, fitting in with their own policies and procedures, right? So you can use those tools to help reduce the data analysis, right? And let you focus more on the human recruitment. But at the same time, you've got to be very careful with AI and what you do with it and how you're using it. Again, there's a lot of free tools that are out there. ChatGPT, there's an amazing tool out there called Claude. There's X have their own tool out there called Grok. Now they're really fantastic in what they do. But again, you've got to be careful on how you use it and how your staff are using it. An example that I heard about through Microsoft was of a company that was bidding for a tender to supply drones to the Australian Defence Force, right? Huge contract. And they were quite far into that tender process. They'd hired a new marketing person who came on. The marketing person wanted to create a new infographic or something about the drones and what they are and what they do and so on. Took a lot of the data, dropped it into ChatGPT to come up with and summarize and get what they needed. ADF sort of caught wind of that, turned to them and said, all your data and specs and everything are now out in the public sphere. We can't touch you. Right? So not so dramatic necessarily from a recruitment point of view, but if you're putting things into ChatGPT or other things, again, it's people's personal information that you're dealing with, their history, their PII. Where are you putting that information? How are you using it? And are you putting it out into the public domain? Or are you using, a confined AI that will give you benefits, but protects your data and keeps it for yourself? So again, things that need to be thought about in terms of how you're using things, again, to protect your data and your people.
There's another big hammer. That's
huge.
Amazing. Yeah, that's food for thought. Because I think, I'm guilty of that, of being a bit too, just hearing that, being a bit too casual with ChatGPT and just putting stuff in and forgetting that it's not just sitting on my desktop.
Yeah,
interesting.
That's right. And again, what was one, DeepSeek was the huge buzz thing that came out about a month ago. Claimed to have been 10 times better than ChatGPT, 50 times cheaper to run, blah blah blah, out of China. What happens to that data when you drop it in there and start asking it to do things for you?
Yeah, it's at the beg and mercy of certain governments, isn't it? As soon as you put information in there. So, but I think that's maybe that's homework item number 3 for everybody today, is to think about how their teams are using AI modules, ChatGPT and others. Where is that data being exposed? Because there is a real risk there, because I wouldn't want to be the CEO or MD of an organization that has a similar type call that the Defense Department gave that supplier saying, hey, what are you doing? This information is now public. So
and I'd say, especially even if you're looking at executive recruitment and those people that up there, that even more so.
I think the scary thing about all this is too that often when the user's doing it, they're doing it innocently. They're not doing it to create a disaster.
Absolutely,
it's no
which is even more frightening.
Nature.
No, correct.
But I think that makes it more frightening because it's
people are actually trying to be more productive and trying to be more helpful and trying to get through more, and like you said, absolutely, it's innocent. There's no malicious intent there at all.
That poor woman or man who did the ADF contract, that's horrific, isn't it? Okay.
Yes. And for the listeners, there is some simple solutions there around that ChatGPT exposure to make sure that that's not feeding into the large learning modules outside your parameters. Yeah. Make sure that you understand where your team's using it and have some policies in place. Educate the team is probably the easiest thing. Prevention, as Andrew would support, is better than the cure with this stuff. You don't want to have to, go backwards.
And like we said, your question before, what's the biggest vulnerability in a business? Ultimately it comes down to often the people.
Such an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking before the show around scaling, because some of our teams do need to scale up and scale down quite rapidly, maybe on some large recruitment drives. They might need to bring an extra 10, 15, 20 people to deliver upon those. Certainly happens in the large-scale recruitment businesses. And, those hiring volumes impact dramatically on IT support and needs for that organisation. How in 2025 do you see, IT support scaling up or down efficiently to make sure that it is meeting the business needs of your customers?
I think a lot of that comes down to the solutions that people are using and having standards and policies in place. So if we look at our clients and so on, we've got a standard setup and configuration and so on for users when they're coming on. So if they bring on 3 new users, we go through that straight up standard setup. They get all the tools, all the applications, everything that they need, laptop delivered to them. Off they go, they can work, right? Then you've got to look at sort of the back-end systems that the business is using, and are those systems scalable as well? Can I ramp up my ATS to have another 15 people on there now, and they'll work while we need them, and in 3 months when this contract is over or whatever it is, and we come back down, can we just reduce those numbers again? And that's across all the subscription services that people are using. Say if there are organizations that are using proprietary systems that have been built for them that are running on servers or so on. Again, physical servers in your office, they're hard to scale up and down because you can't throw more stuff in and take it out again. But, if that's what you need and that's what you've got, then having those running in cloud infrastructure, Google Cloud, Microsoft Cloud, Amazon Cloud, AWS, whatever it is, then built the right way, those things can be scaled up when you need them, scaled back down when you don't, to allow for that to happen. But again, it's looking at having solutions that give you that capability that you can easily just add in extra, use it, drop it back again when you're finished.
And are you seeing a trend in BYO devices? Do a lot of your clients prefer to have a machine spun up, delivered for a new worker, or are you seeing a lot of them saying, okay, well, this is the policy we have, you can BYO, but you've got to work within our confines of policies and procedures, etc.?
It's always a bit of a touchy subject, I think, because when we come back to how do we protect the data that we're using, right? So if it's a BYO device, then you need to be imposing on your staff and on their devices the tools that you need to protect your data. Now, as you're coming into an organization, are you going to be happy to have all of that stuff sitting on your personal device? Most of the time, no, it's not. And then, you've got that conflict between the business and the user as to, well, who's got control and what do we do about it? Personally, I think it is best that an organization owns the device. They supply the device, it is fully controlled, it is fully managed, they know that they've got everything on it that they need, and they use that device for their business and to do everything they want. You can control the data, you control what happens with the device. If it gets lost, you can make sure that it's either remotely wiped if it comes back online, or it's encrypted in a way that the data, there's nothing accessible on it if somebody was to get hold of it. So, like I said, I think within a business, if you are taking your data protection and your data seriously, then unfortunately you've got to supply the devices to users.
Yeah, it's becoming a lot more complex because of modern recruitment platforms. I just use a username and password on any machine to access the company's information via that little window.
Correct. And that's a risk assessment that you've got to do as a business. Yeah. What if the user leaves? What if such and such happens? Can we exfiltrate that data off their machine? And what's going to be on there if they go? If it's harmonious and they're happy for you to clean it up before they leave, fantastic. If it's not, and they're gone tomorrow, whatever is on their machine is on their machine. You've got no control over it.
Yeah, maybe that's another one to think about. Team, is it practical, or is it worthwhile, the risk associated with that BYO device, to allow that policy? Might be the easy way of doing it. It's a smaller cost on the company, but in the short term, maybe. But that medium to long term could be a lot more costly to have that open.
And I think where I think BYO devices is easier is things like mobile phones or so on, where you're not storing the same data.
It's much more limited. Right?
It's limited in the systems that they're accessing, and those systems can easily be turned off, or that data can be remotely wiped from the machine from the device very easily without impacting on their personal space.
Yeah.
Andrew, what percentage of recruitment companies or just businesses in general do you think are taking this stuff seriously versus just wait and see?
Burying their head in the sand. Or maybe not even aware. Maybe not even thinking about it.
Or exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
I don't know if I can put a percentage on it, but I can say that people are starting to think about it more and consider it more.
Okay.
But they're not prioritizing it enough. So, we'll have those conversations often with our clients where either we've been initiating the conversation for a long period of time around their data and their security, and then they go, okay, let's look at this. Or they've come to us at some point sort of saying, hey, what about our data and security? What do we do? And we go, great, conversation we've been wanting to have. Let's sit down and do it. You present to them what is involved and what's there, and they're like, maybe we'll just carry on doing what we're doing at the moment, right? So they're thinking about it, but again, like I said, they're not prioritizing it enough because they haven't been bitten.
And I would have thought, because in recruitment we're dealing with so much third-party data, like, you think about your candidate database, massive, isn't it? Really eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I think as long as people think about this stuff, then it's up to them to make a decision on what they do with it next.
It is, absolutely. And I think that's the thing, is it's got to be front of mind. People really have to think about all of these different things, or find a partner to work with that can help them understand what's involved, what the risks are, how to roll it out, how to implement it, and what to do.
Yeah. I mean, that might be a good segue to give a
Certainly
bit of a spiel
some lessons for me
about.
there.
Yeah, for sure. I've got some homework items. Don't worry, I'm not immune to this conversation. But maybe you can tell the audience a little bit about your services that you provide to different sectors, and how that might plug a few of the holes that we've talked about today, Andrew.
Yeah, well, so from our perspective, our goal is really to make sure that businesses can continue to function and work, be productive, grow, and succeed. That's what we want to see. How do we do that? We partner with our clients. We don't like to see ourselves as a third-party vendor as such, but more as an integrated partner that works with the business to help them achieve their goals, right? And like we said through this whole discussion, technology is the fundamental foundation now of all businesses, right? Without technology, you can't do anything. There are very few businesses that can work without technology. Sure, for now, we don't have 3D bricklayers, but you've got to get out there. You physically got to do it. But for most of the things,
there is actually, Andrew. I've seen one. Sorry to.
No. They're there. I've seen some stuff, but it's not mainstream yet.
Not yet. Almost.
Correct. Like I said, we want to work with organizations to help them navigate through the use of technology within their business. How do we do that? Most often we'll come in and have a conversation around who are you? What do you do? How does your business run? What's your business about? And look at doing what we would call a cybersecurity risk assessment, helping them to assess the risk that they have, bring to them and show them, right, this is what you've got. This is where the gaps are. These are where your vulnerabilities are. This is what the impact is going to be on your business. And then ultimately, how do we shore that up and how do we look after that? And build a package around that for them to say, right, this is what it's going to be. And then it's clear to them exactly where they're at, why they need what they need, what those things are, what the impact on their business is if they don't have it, and similarly, what's required in order to help protect and sustain their business running. And then, almost as a side thing, but providing on top of that all of their support. So knowing that they've got a trustworthy organization they can call and go, whether it's just we've got a new user coming on board, we need a laptop set up and we need an account set up for them, or my printer doesn't work, or my computer's going a bit slow, or we're implementing a new recruitment system and we need to know, can we integrate that with our current systems? Where are the gaps? What do we need to do? But having somebody that can help them navigate and understand all of that.
No, that sounds amazing. I think there's a lot of recruiters that do a really good job at getting things started, but they need to get it to a certain stage where they've got to manage some of those risks. And as we were just chatting, have that risk assessment, and then you as an organisation can say, yes, we're happy with the risk as it is, or we need to do something about that risk.
Correct. But at least you're coming from action. A point of knowledge.
That's it. In immigration world, I used to do a bit of work in-house, and one of the terms I always remember is knowingly or recklessly. And the immigration department doesn't care if you make the wrong thing. You either did it knowingly, so you did it against their guidelines, or you worked outside their guidelines, completely innocently. That was reckless in their mind. So not to put a dampener on the conversation, we could be seen as being reckless, you and me, BK, by not knowing that we should be doing a few of these things behind the scenes. So I've certainly got a few to-do items after today.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at sort of Australian regulation as such, and there isn't a lot of regulation in Australia compared to other countries, but we have what are called the notifiable data breach laws, right? So depending on the size of your organisation, if your organisation is breached, then there's a requirement on you to notify the authorities around that. But most of the time they want to see that you've taken reasonable steps to protect your data, right? What does that mean? That's a very open-ended thing. But for an organization, I would assume, depending on the size of the organization, what is reasonable for you to do to protect the data and the systems that you've got. And if you've done that, then you might get a slap on the wrist or a little bit of help around it, or told to up it a little bit, but they're going to look at you favorably, right? And I'll just add one more thing in there. If you look at organizations today around both business insurance and what we would call cyber insurance, the insurance companies are also looking at all of those things that we've discussed today, and have you implemented any of them, right? Because they want you to now notify them of what you have in place, what you don't have in place, how it's being looked after, how it's being monitored, how it's being checked, and so on, because that's going to affect your policies.
So just on that, is that something, this is going to sound really naive, is that something that recruitment agency owners should be having in place, is cybersecurity insurance?
I think everybody should be investigating that and having that in place for them. Absolutely. Yeah. And look at your existing policies, because there might be some policies that you have that have a little bit of cyber in them, but doesn't really cover anything. Okay. Most organizations have a separate cyber insurance policy to protect against, the threats. God forbid that you should
Amazing.
be
And they probably give some parameters around what they expect as well, I suspect. Fascinating conversation. I'm a little bit anxious.
Yeah, I think.
Look, you know what? We'd be happy to speak. If anybody is worried and anxious or so on, or just wants to talk through anything, we'd always be happy to have a conversation with anybody around that, just to help, where we can.
That's lovely. Thanks, Andrew.
Perfect.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I've got, as I said, a few things to do after this show. So hopefully you guys listening today also have a little bit more insight into the world of IT in 2025, and maybe there's a few to-do items on yours. Don't sit on those, guys. Make a list and have a chat with your peers, your partner, your business partner, and see if there is need for action. I think our world is very privileged that we do get a lot of information about the people we work with. So make sure that we're doing the right thing by them is my takeaway from today.
Yeah. Lots of food for thought there. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Pleasure. Anytime. Happy to be with you.
Thanks for joining us for today's episode of the Tech Savvy Recruiter. If you like to stay up to date with the latest recruitment trends and insights, make sure that you remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And also, if you'd like to speak to Andrew about turning your tech stack into your secret weapon, or myself around creating an agency that delivers you more money, more meaning, and more freedom, we'd absolutely love to chat. Reach out to us on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for your support. We look forward to seeing you next time.